I was working around the house, tidying things up, which I love to do. And this particular day, it was a quiet day, and it's very peaceful here. I heard a voice coming from the left side, and the voice said, "Can I have your children? Can I have your children?" And I said, both of them? Doug and I met in southern Minnesota when we were 15 years old. Doug was a paper boy, and I was babysitting. It was the best part of my day that I could go and receive him at the door.
And so we were able to just form a bond, a very, very close bond, even though we were so young. Mm-hmm. But we dated for 7 years before we were married. Faith was played a part in the early years of our marriage. Wherever we were, we always made sure we went to Mass.
So I grew up Protestant. I became Catholic in 1993. By working of the Holy Spirit, I think the Lord pulled out all stops and showered me with graces and empowered me to say, yes, I would become Catholic.
Yeah, my brother and I were just normal kids growing up, honestly. My dad would bring us to Mass on Sundays.
My brother and I would play lots of games at church.
And my dad was very devout, so he was in prayer and deep in prayer. And my brother and I, we would just goof off like any kid 7, 8 years old.
My dad would be the whole Mass like this, just like praying and praying and praying.
Slid underneath the bench in front, I remember one time, and like we had the bright idea of starting to untie people's shoelaces.
And tie them to the kneelers in front of them. So when they got up to go to communion, their shoes were tied to the pews ahead of them.
And at that point in time, I don't think anyone would have ever thought we would become priests.
There was one rule that my dad had, and that was you never miss Mass. Once we went fishing, we were way up there in northern Minnesota. We caught all of these fish. We were in this tent with my dad, and nightfall came and we were asleep in our sleeping bags, and there was this big thunderstorm. My brother got really scared and he jumped up to run to my dad, and he knocked over the cooler of fish, and that went over everything in the tent, and we reeked of fish. We reeked of walleye, and it was just, I remember the next morning thinking, this will be the one time we don't go to Mass. And my dad was like, get in the car. We smelled so bad, and we went to this one little country parish, and we sat way in the back. People moved to the very front away from us. I remember driving afterwards with my dad, and I said, Dad, why? Like, why do we always go to Mass? And my dad said, well, Jason, if I'm going to love your mom the way she deserves, and if I'm going to be the father that you and Aaron need, I need God. I need God.
And the voice said, which I believe to be the Lord, both of them. And I said, yes, you can have our children, but I can't do this alone. You'll have to help me. That was the moment that I feel gave us the grace to support our children.
I don't remember ever thinking about the priesthood or even the possibility of becoming a priest until after high school when I went to college. It just wasn't even in my mind anywhere. Until all of a sudden, once when I was at a Mass and when the priest lifted up the host, I just had this piercing thought that was one of the clearest thoughts I've ever had. And I thought, if there's one thing in life I'm called to do, it's that. And I knew immediately I was called to be a priest.
So as I was a little bit older now, maybe my teenage years, every time we would go to Mass, almost every Sunday they would play Here I Am, Lord, the classical Here I Am, Lord song. And we would be singing this, and I'd be thinking, Lord, you're calling me? You're really calling me? There wasn't a doubt in my mind. I already kind of knew that the Lord was calling me. And as we'd sing that song, I would be just kind of repeating in my mind, Lord, here I am. If you're calling me, I'm willing to go.
And so I had to tell my mom and dad and my brother. And
One evening, we were having supper at our table.
So Jason was all of a sudden, we were there at the supper table, and he got really nervous.
And I was thinking to myself, I have to tell them that I'm going to be, that the Lord called me.
And all of a sudden, Father Jason jumped to his feet.
Okay, like once I say this is like I've dove in.
And we're all thinking, I don't know, maybe he's going to go out with this girl, or who knows. And so he's pacing back and forth, and he says, I've really been thinking about it. And we're like, well, what are you thinking about?
I said, hey, I'm going to become a priest.
Whoa!
We're like, what? You want to be a priest? And I turned to my brother, I'm like, you want to be a priest? I want to be a priest. And we looked at each other like, why didn't you ever tell me? I'm like, why didn't you ever tell me?
And if you go and I go, then mom and dad aren't going to have any grandchildren.
And I turned to my mom and I'm like, well, Mom, I guess that means you won't have grandkids.
To which Doug and I said, the most important thing for you is to follow the Lord's will, not to have grandchildren, but to do exactly what God wants you to do, because then you're going to have very deep happiness, and the Lord will equip you for the journey.
She sat back in the chair, she looked at me in the eyes, I'll never forget it. She says, if it's God's will, you can do it.
And that I found that to be really moving. When I had that moment of the call, I'd never heard of the Legion, not even remotely. And I remember a friend of mine was telling me about the Legionaries of Christ, and they were saying that these priests are all in. And I thought to myself, that's exactly what I want. If I'm going to become a priest, as best as I can, I want to be a saint. I want to go all in on this. And so the description that they were giving about the Legion of being both really strong and virile on the one hand, but also charitable and kind on the other, and filled with zeal for the salvation of souls, that was exactly what I was looking for.
Nel nome del Padre, del Figlio e dello Spirito Santo.
At Father Jason and Father Aaron's ordination, it was so close to heaven that we could almost reach out and touch it.
Especially moving to me was when they sang the Litany of the Saints. We just felt like we were not just present in that moment, but the whole church in the past and was with us as well.
And it just all comes together in that very moment, and we say, yeah, Lord, this is exactly what you want for our children.
The moment of my ordination was extraordinary, honestly. I remember that they gave us a pamphlet for the Mass, and it was a picture of the Last Supper, but it was simply the disciple John resting his head on Jesus' heart. And during the course of the Mass, I was just like taking my thumb and like putting it over to the disciple St. John, desiring that my priesthood would be a true listening to the Lord's heart.
When I got home after being ordained a priest, and after all of the activity and the ordination ceremony itself, the most vibrant memory I have of that day is sitting on my bed and just looking at my hands. And I could still smell the holy oil, thinking, what are these hands going to do? They're going to bless. They're going to consecrate the Eucharist. They're going to forgive sins. They're going to embrace and console, cast out demons. I remember standing up from the bed and thinking, well, after I walk through this door and I go back downstairs, everything will be different. I'm a priest. And I remember reaching out for the door handle, taking a deep breath, and that's how it all started, like that.
For me to be a Legionary of Christ is to be a missionary priest but not one that lives the priesthood alone. He's part of a larger spiritual family called Regnum Christi. Our charism as Regnum Christi members is to make the kingdom of Christ present. Christ is the kingdom himself, and he wants us to be his testimony, to be his witness, to be his apostles, to truly make him present to the remotest ends of the world, and in all the most varied circumstances. And together as a spiritual family, we're called to do that. The last 6-7 years of my life, I've been helping out as international communications director, and that's been such a beautiful opportunity for me to witness that and see Regnum Christi members as lay Regnum Christi members, legionaries, consecrated women, lay consecrated men. What's key and what's actually such an important part of our charism is that we are called to make him present, Christ alive here, now. That's what we're called to do. That's who we are.
I always think of how Jesus worked. Jesus preached to the multitudes. And then for the multitudes, he had 72 that were beginning to follow him. And I think of the 72 like being Regnum Christi. And from the 72, he had 12. And maybe that's like the legionary community. But then even within this 12, you have people that Jesus would invite, Peter, James, and John, into the house. And there it is that he would teach them things of which he wouldn't teach the multitude. And then that's where you have this sort of relationship that's developing. And that's a real special way of uniquely teaching. We want to help build up parishes. We want to work alongside parish priests and of course the bishop within the diocese. But the way we want to do that is as a missionary priest who is able to go and to meet people perhaps that are on the peripheries of the parish, that are out in the highways and the byways, and to meet them there and to bring them back towards the parish, such that their life, they can be entering into the fullness of the Catholic faith.
I think that the best person a lay person can do for a priest like myself and as a legionary is to fully live their vocation. I have been so impressed by so many lay people who live healthy, holy family lives in the imperfection, in the messiness, in the difficulties, in the struggles. To not think that because you're having difficulties or struggles that that's necessarily a bad example for the priest. Honestly, my greatest examples of lay people have been the ones who have struggled and who have actually come and said, I want to follow the Lord and I don't know how. That's so beautiful.
You know, the gospel says that when somebody leaves, they'll receive 1,000-fold. The passage is, I forget, I'm Catholic, so I don't remember the chapters and verse. But the passage is when anybody leaves home, leaves father, mother, so forth, and home and follows me, they'll be given 1,000-fold in return. One way you can support is to see yourself in that passage. You're part of that 1,000-fold for those who have stepped out to follow the vocation. That your generosity and your support, your kind words, it's all part of this gospel passage. And it's part of Jesus' promise to those who have stepped out to follow him, that there will be people that will support the priests.
Part of the prayer that I pray for our children is for them to be surrounded by people that love them and send them good friends. Maybe every priest needs that.
I was very pleased when our Father Sean Aaron, who's our territorial director, asked me if I would consider going to Cheshire, to return to Cheshire, to walk with the brothers in their first 2 years of formation. It's called the novitiate, the university where you study Christ. And it's those delicate yet so essential and important first steps where you discern the call, align yourself with that call, and lay the foundations for the priesthood and your life as a legionary. So I'm very much looking forward to working with the novices.
To be able to follow the Lord these years, and with this deep mission underlying it all, and above all, the Lord who has been so faithful in journeying with me, with my brother, with our family, totally worth it. I can't imagine really a better life than the one that the Lord's called me to.
Doug and I adopt into our hearts and into our prayers all the souls that Father Jason and Father Aaron will come in contact with. And you know, if you go outside on a clear night and you look up into the sky and you see all those stars, I look up there and I say, whoa, maybe that's all the souls that our children will be touching, and in a sort of way, you know? And that is who we need to be praying for, this infinite amount of souls that the Lord has prepared for them. Our children are given to us by the Lord. The Lord asks us for our children, and we give our children to the Lord. And after ordination, our children, through the consecration of the Eucharist, bring us Jesus. And it is the most perfect circle of love.